Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're putting on our cultural anthropologist hats to decode the completely fascinating invisible social web of the Zeliangrong tribe of Northeast India. Now, when you study the rugged, historically isolated landscapes of North India, you realize pretty quickly that going it alone, that was nearly impossible. Historically speaking, a community's very existence required absolute, ironclad group solidarity. So today we're going to explore how seemingly simple everyday elements, we're talking a piece of jewelry, a specific fabric pattern, or an ancient marriage ritual, actually act as the absolute bedrock for this community's survival. We're going to unpack how these elements weave together a deeply interconnected society where literally every action has a collective purpose. It's an incredible system, so let's jump right in.
Consider the Na-Thing armlet. At first glance, it's just a simple brass spiral, right? But its social weight within the community is absolutely immense. Just imagine the physical sensation of wearing solid brass, looping up to 7 or 8 times around your arm. This is a highly visible nonverbal declaration of an unmarried woman's chastity and her social status. It completely communicates her place in the community before she even opens her mouth to speak a single word. As cultural anthropologists, we are constantly hunting for these vital nonverbal cues. Because this specific armlet is strictly reserved for unmarried women, violating the norm, say, by wearing it after marriage, is considered a profound offense against the community's core values. It's a perfect, everyday example of how material culture actively enforces social boundaries.
Okay, here is our syllabus for today. We'll be systematically peeling back the layers of this society, starting with the visible symbols of their clothing, then examining the blueprint of their kinship, the intricate machinery of their marriage rituals, the taboos that keep everything in check, and finally, the ultimate community glue that holds the whole shebang together.
Section 1. Decoding costumes and symbols. Let's look at the visual declarations of tribal identity, starting with the vibrant, highly visible material culture seen during the Gaan-Ngai festival.
The intricate attire worn during these festival dances, specifically the Longgo-Faesoi wrap and the Bungkum waist belt, are way more than just beautiful clothing. They are incredibly strict markers of identity and occasion. The Longgo-Faesoi has these highly specific red borders framing deep black body panels, intersected by meticulous stripes. You have to understand, this is not everyday wear. The very act of weaving these specific patterns is a massive generational transfer of cultural knowledge. These garments are locked down, reserved exclusively for the most profound, gravity-laden life events you can experience: weddings, funerals, and sacred dance performances.
Now, lingering on the concept of mythic origins is absolutely crucial here. The cultural myth dictates that humans actually copied this exact garment pattern from the goddess Didinpui during a sacred primordial ceremony. So think about what that means. When a Zeliangrong bride wraps herself in the Longgo-Faesoi, she isn't just putting on a fun celebratory costume, she's undergoing a literal psychological transformation. She's stepping directly into a mythical lineage. She is wearing a visual declaration of faith that binds her to the shared, eternal cosmic history of her entire people. It's incredibly powerful.
Section 2. The blueprint of kinship. How do all these visible symbols actually map onto the invisible social architecture of the tribe? So the big takeaway here is that kinship is the blueprint dictating literally every single social interaction. Zeliangrong society is strictly divided into 4 exogamous clans: Kabui, Gaan-Ngai, Gaan-Ngai, and Rongmei. Now, exogamous is a fundamental anthropological term. It just means you absolutely must marry outside of your own group. So a Kabui cannot marry a Kabui. No exceptions. This is a brilliant, mandatory rule because it forces families to constantly reach across clan lines to build alliances. It weaves an incredibly tight, interdependent social fabric. It acts as this massive survival net, where everybody relies heavily on someone outside their immediate biological family.
And their kinship terminology? It's a fascinating psychological mechanism. Take the term pui. They use this word to address not just their biological mother, but an entire generation of women of their mother's age. This creates what we call widespread sibling solidarity. Just think about what that means for community cohesion for a second. Every elder woman in the village feels a deeply ingrained maternal responsibility toward you. It effectively nukes the concept of isolated, atomized nuclear families. You aren't just an individual out on your own. You are, quite literally, a child of the entire village.
Moving on to Section 3, the machinery of marriage. This is the real catalyst for forging alliances. Marriage here acts as the ultimate engine for generating that crucial community bonding. For followers of the Tinkau Ragwang Chepriak religion, Marriage is never, and I mean never, just a casual, fragile social contract that you can back out of easily. It's a profound, unbreakable religious sacrament. There's this deeply moving local belief that the supreme god Tin Khao Ragwang already tied the couple's hair together in his heavenly abode long before they were even born. By viewing marriage as a predestined divine command rather than just some personal choice you made on a Tuesday, the culture replaces the fragility of human relationships with an absolute, unbreakable cosmic duty.
The highest form of traditional marriage, the Kaminthan no Shan, is a total masterclass in carefully negotiated community alliances, and it all starts with incredible suspense. Elderly women from the boys' village will discreetly visit the girl's house and secretly leave a lao gai, an iron hoe, on a bed or some visible spot. And then, the tension sets in. They just wait. If the girl's family doesn't return that iron hoe within 5 days, boom, the proposal is officially accepted. From there, respected elderly negotiators step in to mediate every single detail. This ensures that the entire community is deeply involved and invested in the union right from day one.
A massive part of this negotiation is the numan, or the bride price. This requires highly specific, culturally valuable items to be transferred. We're talking about 2 full-grown buffaloes, spears, swords, brass armlets, and importantly, the manpi, a pair of tightly bound iron hoes. In a traditional agrarian context, buffaloes and iron tools weren't just nice to have. They represented massive economic power and raw survival capacity. This is a profound transfer of capital that physically ensures the survival and prosperity of the families involved.
Now, looking at this massive list of buffaloes, weapons, and brass, a modern observer might be a little shocked. You really have to ask, is this essentially a commercial purchase of a woman? Okay, we absolutely must reframe our Western biases here. As anthropologists, we understand that this exchange is deeply symbolic and incredibly protective. Sure, it honors the parents, but more importantly, it acts as highly effective social insurance for the bride. It legally establishes the husband's responsibility to protect her. Get this, if the husband initiates a frivolous divorce, he loses all of these immensely valuable items. He loses the buffaloes. The sheer threat of losing this wealth deters separation, thereby ensuring long-term family stability and wider community cohesion.
During this whole marriage process, the bride enters what anthropologists call liminality. It's a transitional, highly vulnerable phase of a rite of passage. Because she's in this spiritually open, transitional state, she's adorned in specific protective items like the Tadentu. This is a cornelian bead necklace with really distinct orange, white, yellow, and black colors. But these aren't just decorative beads. They are strict spiritual necessities believed to actively ward off evil spirits. It's essentially spiritual armor, ensuring her safe transition so she can fulfill her vital role in the community.
Section 4. Taboos and Social Boundaries. So what happens when the system breaks? Because, let's face it, any social architecture is only as strong as its enforcement.
The stakes for these rules are just incredibly high. Marrying outside your clan brings community celebration and total religious validity. But marrying within your own clan, that's endogamy, and it's viewed as incestuous. It's an absolute taboo. The consequences are pretty devastating. The couple faces lifelong social and religious penalties. The man can never hold a leadership role in the village court, and the woman is barred from performing essential prosperity rituals. It is essentially social death. This highlights just how desperately the community relies on the alliance-building power of exogamy to survive. They literally cannot afford for you to marry inside your own bubble.
If that boundary is broken, a ritual called Mai-Ku-Mei is triggered. This is a dramatic, highly visible enforcement of social survival. The couple's clothes are literally burned in front of the village to regularize the taboo union. And because this rule-breaking so deeply shocks the community, they have to perform a secondary ritual, sacrificing a pig to purify the village and literally call back the frightened souls of the villagers. Actually, think about that phrasing for a second. It implies the community views itself as a single, interconnected spiritual organism that physically suffers when social rules are broken.
Finally, Section 5, the ultimate community glue. Let's tie it all together and look at the overarching authority that keeps this complex machine running smoothly.
This entire intricate system is meticulously managed by the Pei, the village court. But it really helps to frame the Pei not just as a court of law, but as the master architects of the social web. They aren't just sitting there punishing rule breakers, they're actively and constantly maintaining the delicate balance between the 4 clans. Whether a family is coming together through an intricate arranged marriage or separating through a mutually negotiated divorce, the Pei oversees it all to ensure community harmony is always prioritized over individual whims.
This quote right here perfectly summarizes our explainer today. Every single element we've looked at, the brass armlets declaring status, the crazy 5-day suspense over an iron hoe, the devastating consequences of marrying within your own clan, none of these things exist in isolation. The entire machinery of Zeliangrong marriage rituals acts as the ultimate engine for group cohesion. It is meticulously designed to keep the tribe unified, interdependent, and incredibly strong against the test of time.
I really want to leave you with this final, contemplative thought to ponder about your own life. We've decoded the intricate, beautiful social architecture of the Zeliangrong today. But remember, every society, no matter how modern, industrialized, or digital we think we are, absolutely relies on its own invisible web of rules, symbols, and rituals to survive. So, what does your community's invisible structure look like? What's holding your world together? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the fascinating world around you.